Agenda. Hello and welcome to the program. This morning, as the United States is still reeling from the Boston Marathon bombings, the US Senate has failed to pass the most modest of changes to that nation's gun laws, expanding background checks to prevent criminals from obtaining firearms. An angry US president spoke to the media a short time ago at the White House.
I've heard some say that blocking this step would be a victory. And my question is, a victory for who? A victory for what? All that happened today was the preservation of the loophole that lets dangerous criminals buy guns without a background check. That didn't make our kids safer. Victory for not doing something that 90% of Americans, 80% of Republicans, the vast majority of your constituents wanted to get done? It begs the question, who are we here to represent?
And we'll discuss those developments in Washington a bit later in the program. Also, I'm going to be crossing live to Boston shortly for the latest in the investigation into the bombings. First, though, to the historic vote in the New Zealand Parliament yesterday, legalising same-sex marriage. And there is some hope among gay marriage advocates that that vote will have a ripple effect across the Tasman.
They would be legally married. And it raises the question in Australia how they look on those people that have come here to get married. So hopefully it will push the Aussies into doing something.
Joining me on the program this morning to start AM Agenda from Melbourne, Liberal MP Kelly O'Dwyer, and in Adelaide, Labor MP Nick Champion. Nick, first to you on gay marriage. There must be a fair bit of frustration. I know there is certainly among some quarters within Labor that you've got Conservative leaders like John Key, David Cameron in the UK backing same-sex marriage, but your Prime Minister doesn't.
Well, look, we had a vote in the Parliament a little while ago, and in the Labor Party we had a free vote. MPs were free to express their conscience. I did that, and I think I was on the right side of history. And what blocked that bill moving forward in any way was the fact that Tony Abbott bound the Liberal Party and bound people like Kelly O'Dwyer to a party position. And so you had on one side of the Parliament a conscience vote and on the other side of Parliament a block vote. And that killed any hope for reform in this area in any way. So I think, you know, if people want to work out why civil liberty measures aren't making progress in Australia, they should look no further than Tony Abbott and the Liberal Party.
Kelly O'Dwyer, your response to that, particularly in the context of John Key, the Nationals leader in New Zealand, the Conservative leader, allowing his party a conscience vote, which then did facilitate that successful passage of the same-sex marriage bill yesterday.
Well, look, I think, Kieran, everybody knows my personal views on this issue. I made that very clear in a speech to the Parliament. But let me say this about the free vote. Tony Abbott and the Coalition took a position, a policy position, to the last election that marriage was between a man and a woman. And unlike this current government, we don't break the promises that we make to the electorate. That was a promise made at the last election. That was a promise that was honoured in the vote that happened some months ago. Going forward, who knows what the position will be? Who knows what the makeup of the Liberal Party room will be? Frankly, you know, who knows what the makeup of the Labor Party room will be at that time. I think that social change is complex. It does change over time, and I think that the position on this issue will evolve over time.
Apparently the Greens, Kelly, are going to introduce a bill which would not legalise same-sex marriage in Australia, but at least recognise it, recognise marriages that have been held or signed, authorised in different nations, like New Zealand, for example. Would you be sympathetic to such a bill?
Well, look, I obviously haven't seen the bill, and I don't pass comments on bills that I haven't seen. So I'll have a look at it, and I'm sure our party room will have a look at it, and we'll make our position known.
Okay. Well, Nick, I'll get back to you on that a bit later. First, though, I want to cross live to Boston, and Tori Dunnan from CNN is standing by live. Tori, there have been some reports earlier that there had been an arrest made. Those reports were then played down or rejected by officials within the FBI. What's the latest in the investigation? Can you tell us?
Sure. Well, Kieran, you're exactly right about that. The FBI is saying no arrests have been made. We're actually waiting for a news conference that could take place at some point tonight. That's really the latest information there. But what we have from law enforcement sources is that there's some video where they see someone in the video wearing a white baseball cap, a man wearing a white baseball cap. And Kieran, they're looking to question that man in particular, saying that it could possibly be a suspect. But at this point, the FBI also, as you mentioned, saying no arrests have been made, and potentially more information could come out in this news conference if in fact it does take place.
And Tori, I know that authorities had been calling on those that were at the marathon, others, bystanders and so on, to pass on video. Have you got any sense, is there any sense that that sort of information is playing a part in their investigation into the bombings?
Sure. I mean, they're still asking for the public's help. We know that they received, as of this morning, more than 2,000 tips from members of the public. They're also sorting through video as well as pictures, looking at news footage. And as I mentioned, there's a piece of video. We don't know exactly what that video might be, but authorities are looking at that, saying they want to question someone in the video, so possibly some of this video that's been turned in from surveillance, as well as some people who were at the marathon, may play a role eventually in this investigation.
Tori Dunnan, CNN reporter live from Boston. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. I appreciate it. Let's go back to Nick Champion and Kelly O'Dwyer now. Nick, I want to move on to the United States, and not specifically on Boston, but the developments in the US Congress, the Senate, voting down the most modest of changes to that country's gun laws just a few days after this violence on the streets of Boston. It's hard for Australians, I think, and you know, the vast majority of Australians to actually get your head around the thinking that would see 46 members of the US Senate vote down the most modest of changes. You saw how angry US President Obama was there. It really is such a cultural epidemic almost, isn't it?
Well, look, I think this is a matter for US domestic law, and so Australian politicians should not sort of come in too hard on it. But I think in Australia we have a bipartisan sort of view based on the very good changes that John Howard put in after the Port Arthur massacre. And that bipartisanship is really about keeping guns out of the hands of people who might be unstable and who might commit terrible crimes. So that's, I suppose, part of our national culture now, and it's a good part of our national culture. We can't lecture Americans or tell them what to do, but we hope that they take some heart from our example, and the rest is really up to them, I guess.
Kelly O'Dwyer, the US President in that news conference a bit earlier was flabbergasted, to say the least.
Well, indeed. Look, I couldn't have said it any better than the way that Nick has just described it. I think John Howard, in his gun reform changes, really led. It was a difficult decision at the time. There was a lot of community upheaval at the time when that decision was made, but gee, what a fantastic transformation in our culture it has led to. And Nick is exactly right. It was very much supported by the Labor Party at the time. These were good, prudent, sensible reforms. They have proved to be very effective. We wouldn't lecture America, as Nick says, on what it is that they should do, but I think certainly in Australia we have got the balance right.
Yeah, we certainly do, and they don't. It's quite bizarre, to be honest, to look at that Senate vote. I'm not a politician, but I find it absolutely extraordinary that, and particularly in the wake of the Newtown massacre, that they could see that result for the most modest of changes this morning. It's just shocking. But anyway, let's move on. I want to talk about Tony Abbott appearing at the People's Forum tonight in Geelong. Nick Champion, Tony Abbott's accused of playing the small target a lot. He's not tonight. This is unpredictable. It's a room full of undecided voters, and for an hour, moderated by my colleague David Spears tonight. As I say, he's criticised for going the small target. He's not doing that tonight, Nick Champion.
Well, it's a major achievement by Sky News and David Spears in particular for getting Tony Abbott to an hour-long interview. So kudos to Sky for that.
Hardly.
And hopefully we're all looking forward to Tony Abbott answering some questions. It'll be very interesting to see the questions he answers about the changes he'll make to make working Australians pay more tax, both on their income and on their super. He'll have to answer questions about how he's going to cut the clean energy supplement, which is a very important part of what pensioners get now. He'll have to answer questions about industrial relations reform. He'll have to answer questions about his climate change policy, which is about giving polluters, large companies, huge amounts of public money. So it'll be very interesting to see Tony Abbott answer all these questions, and I hope that they have a vigorous debate and one where he's candid with the Australian people about what his changes are.
Kelly O'Dwyer, I'll let you respond.
Yes. Well, look, I do say kudos as well to Sky. You do these forums incredibly well. And unlike the Prime Minister's Rooty Hill Forum, which was a highly scripted affair where nobody was actually let through the door unless they were very much a Julia Gillard supporter, this is a very open forum. Tony Abbott has no issue in answering questions of the Australian people, and in particular the people of Corangamite. He wants to make sure that they've got a very clear choice. He fronts the media every single day. And I wouldn't say the same about the Prime Minister, who is very keen not to answer questions about her government's policy and her government's record and her government's complete economic recklessness. But in Corangamite tonight, Tony's going to be there. The Corangamite candidate will be there, Sarah Henderson. She is a terrific candidate. She's taking on Darren Cheeseman, who has totally failed his local area. Sarah is somebody who is going to make a huge contribution to the Liberal Party as part of our economic team, as part of our team to ensure that we get Australia back on track. She's been talking to...
Let's have Nick respond. Yep.
Well, look, if they're going to Geelong tonight, they can answer some very important questions about the car industry, and particularly about the Coalition's policy of support.
I think you should answer some questions about the car industry.
Well, no. Let's talk about the car industry. We've got a policy on the table which guarantees production at Holden's till 2022. That's our policy. What's your policy?
Jobs were lost.
And really, you've got to put what you've got to put on the table is that what you will do in terms of industry assistance and co-investment to the car industry. That's a question Tony Abbott has to answer tonight. Co-investment.
I love that
phrase.
Right. I love that phrase, co-investment. I'm not quite sure what it means. But anyway, look, Nick, I'm happy to answer your question if you'll actually give me a chance.
Let's get Kelly to respond. Let's have Kelly respond. Kelly,
what I was going to say is we've had a very clear policy in relation to the car industry. We strongly support manufacturing. We're very concerned that over the last 5 years, one job every 19 minutes has been lost in manufacturing. And this government, if it was serious about manufacturing, would scrap the carbon tax, which is putting a very significant impost on business, increased electricity costs, increased energy costs. It's putting us at a competitive disadvantage to the rest of the world. And I'm very happy to start talking now, I know we'll probably come on to it, about the failure of the carbon pricing scheme over in Europe, which sees carbon now priced at $3 a tonne. In Australia, we're now $23 a tonne.
Let's go to that then. Nick Champion, the business community yesterday in one voice was saying enough's enough. We've got to move to a floating system. That discrepancy that Kelly referred to with our fixed price of $23 a tonne as opposed to $3 a tonne or thereabouts in Europe, it's just too much.
Well, look, I think what it exposes is the complete difference between the approach of business, which is to go to a emissions trading scheme, and the approach of the Coalition, which is to scrap our carbon pricing initiative and go back. Well, no, they want to go to an emissions trading scheme, which the government will do in 2015, and as programmed.
So you're going to have high prices and then drop them.
Well, Kelly,
$29
just listen.
a tonne.
Well, Kelly, just listen, then you'll have your go. Right, we'll go to an emissions trading scheme, which is what business wants in 2015. What you'll do is go back to the future, go back to the past, the sort of Soviet-style policies where you hand huge amounts of money, subsidies to polluters, which, you know, you were just talking about, you know, sort of rolling your eyes and talking about industry assistance to the car industry. So you're sort of a bit inconsistent there. I think we've had the coalition talking about carbon pricing for the last 2 years. Everything they say is about a scare campaign. Everybody knows the real challenge to manufacturing is the dollar, and we've seen Professor Garneau come out with some very sensible proposals, I think, about the dollar, and we should have a discussion about that.
Nick,
Kelly, just finally, we're almost out of time. You've got about 20 seconds.
All I was going to say is, look, Nick, the Prime Minister, and Wayne Swan, they're all off with the Pixies or off with the Greens, because this is not sustainable. It's economically reckless. Everybody said that. There's a $10 billion revenue hole as a result of their fanciful modelling that they've done on the carbon tax. They're taking up to $29 a tonne. It's totally unsustainable when you compare it to Europe at $3.
Off with the Greens. Well, we'll be joined by the Greens after the break. Sarah Hanson-Young, my guest, in a moment. Thank you, Kelly O'Dwyer, Nick Champion. Appreciate it.
Cheers.
A quick break and we'll be right back.